Now, as far as I know, the Corpus Hermeticum is, there was never a book kind of written 1,000 years ago, 1,700 years ago, or whatever it was, called the Corpus Hermeticum. It was a kind of a tradition of writings that sprung out of Alexandria during the kind of later Greco-Egyptian period.
Yep.
So after the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt, Hellenized Egypt, and Alexandria was kind of the capital of that Hellenistic Egypt, and you have this amazing marriage, and this applies to both alchemy and the Corpus Hermeticum. You had this dovetailing or superimposing or syncretizing. There was never a single document. There was just a tradition of discourse around these ideas through these different systems and these different traditions. And then in the Renaissance, Marsilio Ficino translated some of this information, and he didn't necessarily codify it into one book. It was, here's a few books, but the publishers and printers at the time were like, oh, this is kind of similar to that. And they picked and chose, slapped them together. And since then, that has been kind of termed hermetic or hermeticist. Am I right in saying that the Hermetism is like the original Hermetic writing from the Alexandrian time, and Hermeticism is the Renaissance term for that writing as it came to be known?
That's that academic riffraff. How dare you bring
Okay,
that?
I'm sorry. I just read this somewhere. I'm the new guy.
It's that academic aspect of wanting to create those boundaries for the sake of being able to explain the topic within the context of the thing. Hermetism versus Hermeticism, which sounds like a great way to separate things, but in reality, for your common listeners, it's going to obfuscate it.
Right. Well, I thought I was being cool by giving a
technical term. You're very cool.
A technical term that I just stumbled upon. But I do think that might be. It's right that you should point out academic BS when you see it. But at the same time, it's like it does maybe make it clear that there is a ancient world tradition, yes, and a Renaissance world interpretation of that tradition.
Well, I was about to say that's a great point to bring up as far as the ancient aspect, especially when you talk about the statues of the gods, the epithets, and the various different faces that they have. When you look at Greek statues of the gods are not just statues. They are the gods.
Yeah.
That's what's told within Hermetic philosophy, is that man is the maker of gods. By making something within the image of a god, that thing becomes ensouled with the purpose with which it's been constructed.
Mm-hmm.
And this is just like, if you want to simplify it, it's like taking a hammer. Hammer can be an instrument of construction or an instrument of murder, but what it is defined by how you use it. The Temple of Athena had a statue of Athena that was gold. Clearly it's not there anymore because it was gold. But the effort of the sacredness of it, that ensoul it with that aspect, that's the idea of beautiful things and beauty and the gods and things like that, all being ensouled within the effort and purpose.
Now, can I jump in and maybe point out, and again, I might be out of line or taking too many liberties here, but when you say things like that, and I agree that seems to be the case with like statuary from that period, that there was a certain kind of sense that the divine actually embodied the statue.
Right.
And I think that speaks a lot to what I think kind of comes from the Greek Hermetic Hellenic. And it almost seems, sorry, I'm trying to say three different things at the same time, but like that seems to play into the idea that we get in alchemy, that a physical object can be augmented or transmuted into something perceptually higher, whereas in like Gnosticism there is more of a fallen duality where if it's made of something physical, then it must be shit, and it's only and then it's only like spiritual kind of metaphysical things that are of value. and the
That's
physical world is kind of shitty. And so that's, and I almost connect that with a little bit with the difference between like iconoclasm and non-iconoclasm. Like if you think
very good.
that a painting or a stained glass window or a statue can be infused with the divine, you're more inclined to like embrace those things. And if you think that that can't be the case and that physical objects have to be somewhat degraded, then your inclination, your instinct would be to push those away and to not have those around you as much. Is there something to that? That's maybe taken a little bit too
There
far.
is some, and actually, you've made absolutely brilliant, impressive correlations within that. Because when I talk about hermetic data, we're talking about all those things I mentioned: astrology, medicine, farming, magical theurgy, and such like. When you connect those ideas together, that's precisely as muddled as it is. And this is why I tend to, when you said you want to say three things at a time, this is my existence.
Right.
So
Me too. Me too.
it is that thing you've touched exactly on, that very pulse of the idea that it's this deeply interwoven, intertwined, quantumly entangled set of data that we have, for the sake of trying to explicate it, categorize it into these very clear things. But for them, we're so implicitly and culturally inferred that it's hard to kind of pick them apart, really, when you look at them. And that's what I like, this aspect when you look at philosophies like this, and even when you look at the gods themselves of Greek and various other cultures. Gods are clear from afar, but the closer you scrutinize them, the less clearly boundaried they become. Because when I talk about the epithet, suddenly you're like, wait, now we're talking about 20 different kinds of Hermes. Which one is Hermes? And that's exactly the feeling it is.
Right. You also get this, even if you look in, scratch the surface with Greek rational medicine and like the four elements, you have, there's all these senses in which they overlap. I mean, you have some of these early pre-Socratic philosophers, Anaximander, and who would say like, who would say like, you have an element like fire that is both hot and dry. Is that right? I might be getting it wrong, but
hot and
like
dry as fire, yes.
Yeah, but there are other elements that like, what's the other dry element? Is it earth?
Earth is cold and dry.
Cold and dry. So you have two dry elements, and so if you put fire and earth together, it accentuates the dryness.
That's right.
And so there's an overlap. These things are not these elements are not mutually exclusive. So that's why when you combine them in different ways, you get different responses and reactions. If they were kind of hermetically sealed from each other, as it were, like if they were mutually exclusive from each other, you wouldn't be able to combine them at all. And there would not be this sense that when you combine these elements, you can they could share properties, they can transfer properties to each other.
Now, on this theme, I'd like to pull back to the main theory that I was going to touch on within the Corpus Hermeticum, which is the idea of the nous, the Nous. I don't know quite how to pronounce it because I've only really
said nous. I've heard it translate different ways, as mind or knowledge.
Let's go Aristotelian with the concept, because we're connecting this to alchemy. So we're going to do the hylomorphic concept of active intellect.
Yeah,
it's the power that acts upon the passive thing to make it into something in action. That active intellect, the divine influence, the divine madness, if you want to go with the Platonic concept. But the whole notion of inspiration, of madness, of all these things you find within, it's what ties into the alchemical concept of something be able to transform, as you referenced earlier. When you're transforming that thing, you're moving the spirit of gold into physical lead to uplift the matter of it into gold itself by planting the seed of gold. These are all very lovely, vague ways of talking about it, but the philosophy behind it does follow the Aristotelian aspect of becoming. Like when it's the aspect of when when an animal eats something, that thing becomes more of it. Well, so how do you change that? How do you transform that?
Right,
And
right.
that's the aspect of moving the ennobler spirit into things to uplift it. And what's funny about this is it also ties into, interestingly, shamanic concepts when you talk about alchemy and you talk about the gods and you talk about the aspect of ensouling a thing. A person who is a magus or a shaman, I'd argue, is ensouled in the same way. Within shamanic rituals of rites of passage or becoming a shaman, they undergo, usually in most shamanic cultures, and if you want to reference this, Mircea Eliade's
Mm,
shamanism, which is archaic techniques of ecstasy, references numerous different forms of shamanism that help explicate what I'm talking about.
okay.
Anyways, the aspect of ritual agony,
What's it called?
the ritual agony,
Ritual agony. Yes, I like that term. Like things tend to have a dualistic quality. Like the hammer, for instance, it can both create
yes,
and destroy, right?
yep,
The fire, or the idea of rot. You need rot in order to break down matter in order for things to grow. Rot is how you actually get fertilizer. Things can grow from fertilizer.
Empedocles.
Yeah,
The world is caught between the strain of love and strife, the tonos. The tension is where reality sits.
right. So the tension, or even like, yeah, strife. You think, how do you get a ram's horn? This beautiful spiral ram's horn.
The golden ratio.
It's like, well, you get it because there's two rams and they need to like do battle with each other to fight for mates to survive, and that strife that actually creates the physical structure of that beautiful object is created through destruction, created through competition and
Have you
contestation.
have you ever seen? I think I've talked about it before. The Thunder Perfect Mind.
What's this?
It's one of the Gnostic texts from the Nag Hammadi. Uh,
Mm,
okay,
no.
so the Thunder Perfect Mind is essentially the God declaring its identity, where it is the whore and the holy virgin. It's both good and evil. It's this, it's that. It's all opposites with intention. And what I find fascinating about that now is that it is the aspect that you're talking about. True omnipresence and omniscience requires
Mm,
that God not just be merely good, but also all other things as well,
right. Because
which is
it's at
fascinating.
the tension of these things. Because
That's
and
exactly
but I'm trying to, because a lot of times people, they talk about the term duality, um, and in some ways, the dualistic nature of the universe is the way it is, and the way it's good, and the way it works. Like that dualism between two competing things creates, or I think it was Heraclitus who makes all these great aphorisms about how through competition comes love, or through two notes comes a perfect harmony, or through
the power of
strife comes,
adversity.
yeah. So there's that dualistic nature of reality, which goes back to Heraclitus, which is, I think, a true way that the universe works. And yet that's not the same dualism when people talk about, like the Cartesian dualism, where the world is somehow divorced from itself.
Exactly.
You have
And it's
materialistic
so
dualism and
interesting.
the spiritual dualism. So that's the bad dualism. That's the
It's
dualism
the
that.
funny thing is I find this to be these two philosophies of thinking, the idea of the um, Socratic corpus versus this the Cartesian dualistic. You
Mm,
see division in today's culture. And here we are talking about the past culture, which allowed people to realize the joining of concepts that allowed for greater learning and understanding that true understanding isn't merely divorcing things and causing this fractiousness. It's understanding that thread that ties them all together. And
yeah.
that is truly the aspect that was sought within the ephemeral, is that when you have the nous, the nous, the whatever you want to call it, when you have the active intellect of that power working through you, all you don't have to cogitate the thread. It's that divine madness that allows it to just work through you.
Yeah, that sense that adversity creates this enlightenment. We get that, again, through like struggle. I talked about the ram's horn, but there's so many mythic examples of like Prometheus, or the phoenix, or Odin hanging upside down with one
On
eye,
the tree for wisdom, yeah. But
yeah,
not upside down.
to
There's
get the runes.
some
And
stories that he even just literally died, right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
that actually ties in that whole shamanic aspect of being destroyed to be remade better, in better form to fulfill your destiny.
I think a lot of people who maybe poo-poo the overly, what they see as overly simplistic or um, reductive, like four elements of the ancient world,
Right.
They first of all, they don't know the degree to which it was actually quite a sophisticated system. But I think, like, even they also just maybe don't realize that science actually still, modern science, there are still blind spots and still places where we're just as confused as we ever were. For instance, like when people say, well, how is a child created? And and a 200-year-old scientific explanation might have been like, well, the seed of the man
Right.
goes into the egg of the female. And
No, go on with this. This is good.
no,
You just
and then in the I don't know the exact history of science explanation of it, but I imagine 100 years ago it was a little bit more sophisticated, and now you get into microscope, through the scanning electron microscope, we can go deeper and deeper, and we think, well, we're going to solve this riddle of what. So now it's and pardon if I don't know the scientific terminology, but I imagine, like, okay, there's now we know about DNA and how the DNA is transferred, and it creates new amino acids that create the dividing cell structure, and all these things that were unknowable 500 years ago.
Right.
But then you ask, well, why does that happen? And then they'll say, well, because we have the subatomic particles within the amino acids, and that happens. And you say, well, why does that happen? Well, we can go even deeper, and we can give it, and so it's like it never actually ever arrives at the answer to the why. It gives you an ever more lower onion layer account of things influencing each other on a material level, but it never actually can ever give you the reason for the why, because you could always ask, well, why does that happen? And so people now are just as stumped as they were in ancient times.
Have you've heard of the IUD by chance?
The interuterine device?
Yes.
Oh, okay, yeah.
You know what it's made of?
Plastic?
Copper.
Oh.
What's funny
okay.
about that? They don't know how it works. We can't explicate how it works.
Oh,
we don't know.
Really?
We don't know what effect it has. What we do know is that it stops the fertilized egg from ever implanting, right?
So there's something in copper that does that.
Copper is the metal of Venus.
Ooh.
Right?
Didn't women used to put copper bracelets on their wrists if they wanted to, like, conceive? Right, or maybe if they didn't want to conceive. I don't remember.
And that's the thing, is you're talking about the dichotomy of the thing, that because gods weren't just, fertility. It's also, no, please, we don't want that. Yeah. There's that. It also the not having of the thing.
It's the management of the thing, yeah.
And that's the interesting aspect, is that copper, which has been long ascribed to Venus, being venereal and everything like that, is the metal that we still don't know quite what it does. It's still mystified as far as how it operates in order to cause us not to have kids.
Really?
There you have it.
Yeah.
So fun, mystified concepts. And actually, I was going to finish with a quote that
I have 4 kids. I need more copper in my life.
It's the aspect. So there was a guy, F. Sherwood Taylor, stated, "Has science anything to learn from alchemy? Nothing. I believe for science has been refined until it is almost perfect instrument for its purpose." Let's remember that. No importation of the philosophical or religious into science is possible. But has the scientist anything to learn from the alchemist and his medieval contemporaries? Perhaps. He can learn that there are aspects of nature that do not appear in scientific journals, that are impressions of her have in them something of man as well as of matter. He can consider her under the aspect of value as well as of the disposition in space and time. He can reflect upon the mystery of existence of the world and of his relation to it. And that's the funny thing is that we do this striving for purpose within this divorced aspect of science that considers human experience to be at best anecdotal and not used to prove anything. What you have though is this: if you have the power of the humanity within it, this is where we find the drive, where we find the ethics, where we find the purpose. And that is the funny thing when you use the word purpose, is because we talk about the purpose of all of these things, the DNA you talked about, and then the structures and the chemical interaction and all these sorts of things. But what is the purpose of man? And that is something that there was a firm grasp upon when you look at the Corpus Hermeticum. That was this clearly inspirational, clearly powerful, clearly world-shaping in the humanism that arose from it, because there was purpose within it. But now we have this science, and we've divorced it from the imagination. We've divorced it from the aspect of human experience, because human experience can't be quantified. And now we lack purpose.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's really good. Science now is kind of it runs on its own momentum without someone at the wheel. I think it was the philosopher or historian Thomas Kuhn who wrote The Structure of Scientific Revolution. Basically, was saying like what we think of science now, you know, it's like it just goes out and seeks information, it seeks data, results, but it's like it actually gives a slightly skewed version of reality, because it has all these presuppositions, and it has its results are formulated by the various institutions that it serves.
I'm going to cut it even further. I'm going to cut it down further. The results of science are currently defined by their funding.
Right, their funding. That's what I meant. They want certain results from their funding.
Precisely. If you're selling a product and you're greedy, you want your results to support your product. If they don't support your product, you just don't publish them. Science.
You don't. Right, and you get people that you think are going to give you the results that you want before you even disperse the funding mechanisms in order to get the researchers and all the, you know, the grants are given out to people who are going to give you the results that you want.